The Galactic Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 900 species lived under its shadow, and not one of them had ever refused its commands. The Dominion did not ask. It did not negotiate. It arrived, it judged, and it took. Every new species found in the galaxy was placed into one of three boxes. The first box was sovereign, which meant the species was strong enough to be treated as an equal. The second box was servile, which meant the species was useful and would be taken as workers and slaves. The third box was feral, which meant the species was worthless and would be wiped out completely. There was no appeal. There was no mercy. The Dominion had done this so many times that it had become routine, like stamping paperwork. So when the long-range survey fleet called the Pale Reach discovered a small blue planet circling an ordinary yellow star at the edge of a quiet arm of the galaxy, nobody in the Dominion thought twice about it. The planet was called Earth. The creatures living on it were called humans. The survey team studied them for less than a single day. They noted the wars, the pollution, the petty borders drawn across a single world. They noted the short lifespans and the fragile bodies. They noted the lack of any faster-than-light travel. The classification was made in minutes. Species human, grade servile, useful for manual labor, mining, and biological experimentation. A formal subjugation order was filed, approved, and broadcast across every Dominion channel before the humans even knew they had been found. Grand Overseer Telvan was given command of the subjugation fleet. He was a tall and thin creature with skin like gray stone, and 4 arms that he kept folded behind his back when he was bored, which was almost always. He had led 43 subjugation campaigns and had never once faced real resistance. He assembled 4,000 warships, arranged them in the traditional ceremonial formation, and set course for the Little Blue World. But the Dominion had made a mistake. A very large mistake. Humanity had known about the Dominion for nearly 40 years. Deep space monitoring stations, built on the dark side of the moon and scattered across the asteroid belt, had been picking up alien transmissions for decades. At first, the signals were faint and confusing. But over time, teams of scientists and linguists had decoded enough to understand the truth. The galaxy was full of life. Most of that life was ruled by a single empire, and that empire treated weaker species like property. The governments of Earth had argued about what to do for years. Some wanted to make contact. Some wanted to hide. Some refused to believe any of it was real. But slowly, quietly, a consensus formed. A secret global military body called the United Terran Defense Council was created. Its purpose was simple. If the aliens ever came, humanity would be ready. Captain Do-Yun Park was one of the first officers assigned to the UTDC. He was a naval strategist with a calm face and steady hands, the kind of man who spoke little and thought constantly. He had spent 15 years studying the intercepted Dominion transmissions, learning their fleet tactics, their formation patterns, their weaknesses. He was stationed at Lunar Command when the subjugation decree was broadcast. He was the one who decoded it. He brought it immediately to General Unbi Kwan. General Kwan was the commander of the UTDC's First Response Division. She was a small woman with short gray hair and eyes that could cut through steel. She had served in 3 wars on Earth before being recruited into the UTDC, and she had a reputation for 2 things. She never raised her voice, and she never lost. Do-Yun handed her the translated text and watched her read it. The decree called humans livestock. It called them labor stock. It said all resistance would be met with pacification, a word that the Dominion used the same way a farmer might talk about calming a frightened animal. Unbi read it twice. Then she closed the file and looked at the assembled war council. "They will learn our name," she said. Within hours, the Iron Wake Protocol was activated. This was the plan that humanity had spent decades preparing. Orbital defense platforms, hidden among space debris, powered up their weapons. Shipyards, buried deep underground and beneath the ocean floor, opened their doors and began launching vessels that the public had never known existed. Reserve soldiers across every nation received a single coded message on their devices and reported to their stations without a word. Factories that had been secretly producing weapons and armor for years switched to full production. And far beneath the ice of Antarctica, in a facility so secret that fewer than 20 people on Earth knew it existed, a project called Hammer of Dawn received its first live authorization code. Dr. Hajun Lim, the lead scientist, a quiet man with round glasses, who had spent his entire adult life building something he hoped would never be needed, stared at the authorization on his screen for a long time. Then he picked up his coffee, took a sip, and began the startup sequence. The Dominion fleet was still days away. They were coming slowly, proudly, expecting to find a frightened world begging for mercy. They had no idea what was waiting for them. On Earth there was no panic. The news spread fast, as news always did among humans. But instead of fear, something else moved through the population. It was not quite anger. It was not quite excitement. It was something older and deeper. Something that had lived inside humanity since the first time a group of early humans had picked up stones and refused to be prey. It was defiance. Across the world, in every language, in every country, people looked up at the sky and felt the same thing. They were not cattle. They were not slaves. And anyone who came to their home to put chains on them was going to learn a lesson that the galaxy would never forget. General Quan stood at the main window of Lunar Command and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, 4,000 alien warships were flying toward Earth, expecting an easy victory. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The subjugation fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune in a wide and proud formation. 4,000 warships moved like a slow wall of metal, each one covered in the golden markings of the Dominion. Grand Overseer Telvon stood on the command bridge of his flagship and watched the little blue dot in the distance grow slightly larger on his screen. He expected the humans to send a message soon. They always did, the primitive ones. They would beg, or cry, or offer gifts. He had a standard response already prepared. He did not even bother to sit down. But no message came. The fleet passed the orbit of Uranus, then Saturn. Still nothing, just silence. Telvon frowned. Silence was unusual. Most species broke down the moment they saw the fleet coming. He ordered his communication officers to scan all frequencies. The humans were not talking at all. Perhaps they are too primitive to detect us, one of his officers suggested. Telvon accepted this answer because it was comfortable. He ordered the fleet to continue. That was his second mistake. His first had been coming here at all. At the orbit of Mars, the silence ended. Commander Jian Han had been waiting for 6 days. She was a pilot, 31 years old, with quick hands and a quicker mind. She commanded the First Strike Wing, a force of 300 stealth corvettes that had been hiding inside hollowed-out asteroids in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. These ships were small and fast. They carried no heavy armor. They were built for one thing only, to hit hard and disappear before the enemy knew what had happened. Jian received the signal from Admiral Sun Ho Choi, who was waiting with the main fleet behind the moon Phobos. Go. She went. The 300 corvettes launched from their hiding places like a swarm of hornets pouring out of a nest. They moved in complete radio silence, using pre-programmed attack patterns that required no communication. Their targets were not the warships, not yet. Their targets were the soft parts of the fleet, the fuel ships, the supply barges, the communication relays that connected the subjugation fleet to the rest of the Dominion. The attack lasted 11 minutes. Jian personally led the strike on the fleet's main communication hub, a massive dish-shaped vessel near the rear of the formation. Her corvettes hit it from 6 directions at once. The ship broke apart like a glass bottle struck by a hammer. Across the fleet, supply vessels and fuel carriers erupted in fire and debris. When the 11 minutes were over, the subjugation fleet had lost its ability to call for help. Its fuel reserves were bleeding into space, and it had not fired a single shot in return. Telvon was no longer bored. He was furious. He screamed orders at his officers. He demanded the fleet spread out and find the attackers. 4,000 warships broke formation and fanned outward, hunting for the tiny ships that had stung them. This was exactly what Admiral Sunho Choi had been waiting for. Sunho was a patient man. He was 54 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from wood. He had spent 30 years in the Navy and had fought in wars on Earth before being promoted to command the UTDC's main battle group. He understood one thing about war better than almost anyone. The side that loses its composure first usually loses everything else as well. He had positioned his fleet behind the gravitational shadow of Phobos, using the moon itself to hide their energy signatures. 800 destroyers, 200 cruisers, 40 dreadnoughts, and 1 carrier, the Indomitable, where Sun Ho stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the Dominion fleet scatter like startled birds. "All ships," he said calmly, "engage." The human fleet hit the Dominion from the flank. The impact was devastating. Human weapons were built on a principle that the Dominion had never taken seriously: kinetic force. While most galactic species used energy-based weapons like lasers and plasma bolts, humans had perfected the art of throwing very heavy things very fast. Their kinetic accelerators fired slugs of dense metal at a fraction of the speed of light. Their missiles carried warheads designed to punch through barriers physically rather than burn through them. The Dominion's shields were designed to absorb and redirect energy. They were not designed to stop a piece of tungsten the size of a car, traveling at 60,000 kilometers per second. The shields cracked, the hulls cracked, the ships cracked. Lieutenant Minji Yoon was 26 years old and terrified. She was the weapons officer aboard the destroyer Sejong, and this was her first real battle. Her hands were shaking over her console. But when a Dominion cruiser 3 times the size of her ship turned to face them, she did not hesitate. She locked the targeting system, fired a full salvo of kinetic rounds and antimatter torpedoes, and watched the cruiser's reactor core split open like an egg. The explosion was bright enough to see from Mars. She had just scored the first confirmed kill of a Dominion capital ship by a human in history. She did not celebrate. She locked on to the next target. The battle raged for 9 hours. It was later called the Battle of the Red Corridor because of the trail of burning wreckage that stretched across Mars's orbital path. By the 6th hour, over 1,100 Dominion ships had been destroyed or left drifting without power. Human losses were significant too. Nearly 200 ships gone, thousands of sailors dead, but the Dominion was reeling. Telvon stared at his tactical display and could not understand what he was seeing. This was impossible. This was a servile species. They were supposed to surrender. They were supposed to be afraid. Instead, they were killing his ships with weapons made of metal and fire, fighting with a ferocity that he had never encountered in 43 campaigns. It was the first time in Dominion history that a subjugation fleet had retreated from a species classified as servile. As the surviving Dominion ships limped away, Ji-on Han watched them go from the cockpit of her battered corvette. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye. Half her wing was gone, but she was smiling. Back on Earth, Dr. Hajun Lim watched the battle reports with a serious face. They had won, but he was a scientist. He understood numbers. The Dominion had thousands more ships, millions more. They would come back, and next time, there would be no surprise, no ambush, no scattered fleet to pick apart. General Quan appeared on his screen. "How long?" she asked. 60 days, he said. "Maybe 65. "You have 60, she said. "Not 61. Hajun nodded, turned back to his work, and did not sleep for the next 3 days. The galaxy, meanwhile, was in shock. News of the defeat spread across Dominion space. A servile species had beaten a subjugation fleet. It was unthinkable. It was terrifying. And it was only the beginning. The Concord of Nine met in emergency session for the first time in 2,000 years. The 9 most powerful species of the Galactic Dominion sat around a table the size of a small lake and screamed at each other. The failure of the subjugation fleet was not just a military loss. It was an embarrassment. For 12,000 years, the Dominion had maintained its power through one simple belief. Resistance was impossible. Every species in the galaxy believed this. The strong believed it because it made them feel safe. The weak believed it because they had never seen anything different. Now a species of soft, short-lived creatures from a single unremarkable planet had shattered that belief in 9 hours. The debate did not last long. Fear made the decision for them. The Concord authorized the deployment of the Grand Pacification Armada. 40,000 warships, pulled from every corner of Dominion space. Among them were 12 world-enders, the most terrible weapons the Dominion possessed. Each world-ender was a dreadnought larger than a city, carrying weapons capable of cracking a planet's surface from orbit. They had been used only 4 times in Dominion history. Each time, a world had died. Command of the Armada was given to Supreme Warlord Draven. He was old, he was patient, and he had personally overseen the extinction of 3 species that had been foolish enough to resist. Where Telvan had been arrogant and careless, Draven was cold and precise. He studied the battle reports from the Red Corridor with great attention. He noted the human kinetic weapons. He noted their stealth tactics. He noted their willingness to die. Then he issued a single order to his captains. No subjugation, extermination. Leave nothing. The Armada crossed into the solar system 42 days after the first battle. When the sensor data reached Earth, the mood in Lunar Command changed. Admiral Sunho Choi looked at the numbers on his screen for a long time. 40,000 ships, 12 world-enders. His fleet, even after rapid repairs and new construction, numbered barely 1,000. He was outnumbered 40-1. He turned to his officers. "We knew this was coming," he said quietly. "That is why we prepared." Humanity activated Phase 2 of the Iron Wake Protocol. Every human settlement in the solar system became a fortress. Mars was turned into a killing ground. Mines were laid between the moons of Jupiter. Hidden weapons platforms activated across the asteroid belt. And on Earth itself, a network of enormous shield generators buried beneath the oceans powered up, creating overlapping energy barriers around the entire planet. Commander Jeon Han, now promoted after the Red Corridor, was given command of all harassment forces. Her job was simple and nearly impossible. Slow the Armada down. Buy time. Every hour mattered, because deep beneath Antarctica, Dr. Hajun Lim was working without sleep to finish the weapon that might save them all. Jeon took her corvette wings and became a ghost. She struck supply lines, led Dominion squadrons into minefields, ambushed scouts, and vanished before they could respond. Her call sign was Baram, the Korean word for wind, and within days it became the most feared name in the Dominion fleet. Draven lost hundreds of ships to her tricks. But he did not panic the way Telvan had. He tightened his formations, deployed hunter-killer groups to chase her, and kept pushing forward. The outer defenses began to fall. The asteroid belt stations were overwhelmed. Jupiter's moons were bypassed. And then, the Armada reached Mars. Colonel Taewon Shin commanded the Martian defense. He was a ground soldier, not a spaceman, thick-necked and stubborn, the kind of officer who had never retreated from anything in his life. He had 5,000 soldiers of the 5th Orbital Infantry, and a network of weapons platforms orbiting Mars. He was told to hold for as long as possible. He held for 12 days. For 12 days, Taewon and his soldiers fought a battle they knew they could not win. They destroyed over 600 Dominion ships from their orbital platforms. They fought boarding parties in the corridors of their stations. When the stations were breached, they sealed sections and kept fighting from the ones that remained. When ammunition ran low, they improvised explosives from engine fuel and mining charges. On the 12th day, with only 800 soldiers left alive and every station damaged beyond repair, Taewon gave the order to evacuate. The survivors boarded transports and fled toward Earth. Before leaving, Taewon personally triggered the self-destruct on every station and platform, ensuring the Dominion gained nothing from Mars. He was the last man on the last transport. He did not look back. But the worst moment was yet to come. As the Armada advanced past Mars, one of the World Enders turned its weapons toward Luna Station Prime, humanity's largest off-world settlement. 15,000 civilians lived there. Families, scientists, children. Director Yuna Bay was the civilian administrator of Luna Station Prime. She was 48 years old, calm and organized, the kind of person who made lists and followed them. When the evacuation order came, she moved fast. Transports launched one after another, carrying thousands of people to safety on Earth. But the World Ender was closing in, and the last transport was still loading. Yuna could have left. There was room for her on the second-to-last shuttle. Her staff begged her to go. She refused. She stayed at the control console, managing the docking systems and keeping the launch sequence running smoothly. The last transport lifted off with 300 people aboard. Yuna watched it clear the station on her monitor. The World Ender fired. Luna Station Prime was destroyed in a single blast. Yuna Bay was gone. Her final transmission had been recorded. It was short. "Tell them we did not kneel." Within an hour, every human being alive had heard those words. They played on every screen, every speaker, every radio. People stood in the streets and listened to them, and something changed. The grief was enormous, but underneath the grief was something harder and sharper. It was the cold, steady fury of a species that had made its decision. There would be no surrender. There would be no negotiation. There would only be what came next. General Eunbi Kwan received a message from Antarctica. It was from Dr. Hajun Lim. It contained only 2 words. "It is ready." Kwan read the message, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and then opened them. "Tell the Admiral to hold the line," she said. 40,000 warships surrounded Earth. They formed a sphere so thick that from the surface, parts of the sky went dark with their shadows. 12 World Enders took position at equal distances around the planet, their massive hulls glowing with stored energy, each one capable of burning a continent to glass in a single shot. Supreme Warlord Draven stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the blue world below. He felt nothing. He had done this before. He would do it again. He broadcast his ultimatum on every frequency. "Surrender your world, your species, and your future. You have one planetary rotation." He expected silence, or begging, or confusion. What he received was the voice of General Eunbi Kwan, transmitted in every language the Dominion spoke, clear and calm and sharp enough to cut bone. "We are humanity. We do not surrender. We do not kneel. And we do not forgive." "Begin," he said. The bombardment started. 40,000 ships opened fire on Earth simultaneously. Beams of light, balls of plasma, guided energy rounds. All of it poured down toward the surface in a storm that would have melted most worlds in minutes. But the planetary shield grid held. The network of generators buried beneath the oceans created overlapping barriers of energy that absorbed and redirected the assault. The shields shook, they flickered, but they held. Admiral Sun Ho Choi launched everything. Every ship that could fly, every orbital weapons platform, every ground-based missile battery, even civilian vessels that had been hastily fitted with weapons, joined the fight. The space around Earth became a hell of fire and metal. Human destroyers dove into gaps between the Dominion warships and fired at point-blank range, trading their lives for kills. Missile platforms on the ground sent wave after wave of kinetic rounds screaming up through the atmosphere. The sky above every city burned orange and white. But the numbers were against them. For every Dominion ship that was destroyed, 3 more took its place. The shield grid began to crack under the unending bombardment. Power stations failed. Shield sections went dark. Sun Ho knew the mathematics. They could not hold forever. They did not need to hold forever. They just needed to hold long enough. Commander Jian Han knew this too. She had 60 corvettes left from her original 300. Her ship, the Songbird, was battered and leaking atmosphere in 2 sections. Her left arm was bruised from a console explosion. She had not slept in 30 hours. None of that mattered. She had studied the world enders during the approach. They were enormous, but their shields had gaps. The weapon systems that gave them their planet-killing power required so much energy that the shields thinned around certain hull sections during firing cycles. Small gaps, enough for a corvette to slip through. She led her wings straight at the nearest world ender. Dominion point defense guns filled the space around it with deadly fire. Corvettes exploded left and right. She lost 36 pilots on the first pass, but she and the survivors made it through the gap and hit the exposed hull sections with everything they had. The world ender shuddered and began to list. A second run on another world ender crippled its main weapon array. On her third run, the Songbird was hit. The engines failed. Power died on half the ship. She was drifting, spinning slowly, heading straight for the command bridge of a third world ender. She had a choice: eject and live, or stay and finish it. She stayed. She redirected every remaining bit of power to the engines, aimed the nose of her ship at the world ender's bridge, and pushed the throttle forward. The Songbird struck the bridge at full speed. The antimatter core in the corvette detonated on impact. The explosion tore the world ender apart from the inside. Commander Jian Han, call sign Baram, was gone. Captain Do-hyun Park, now commanding the destroyer Gwanggaeto, saw the explosion from across the battlefield. He did not have time to grieve. The shield grid was failing. 3 more sections had gone dark. The Dominion was beginning to push through. He rallied every surviving ship around him and formed a defensive wall above the Pacific Ocean. They held that line for 4 hours, taking terrible losses, refusing to move. Do-hyun's ship was hit 9 times. 2 of his decks were open to space. He kept fighting. He was buying time for one man. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, Dr. Ha-Jun Lim sat at the control console of Project Hammer of Dawn. The facility was shaking. Dust fell from the ceiling. He could hear the muffled rumble of the battle above, transmitted through kilometers of rock and ice. His hands were perfectly still. The Hammer of Dawn was not a bomb. It was not a cannon. It was something entirely new. It created a controlled collapse in the fabric of space itself, a directed tear in reality that erased everything in its path. Not destroyed, not burned, erased. Matter, energy, shields, all of it simply ceased to exist within the path of the beam. Ha-Jun finished the final calibration. He looked at the activation switch. He thought about Yuna Bay and her last words. He thought about Jian Han and her final charge. He thought about every name on the list of the dead that grew longer every minute. He pressed the switch. A beam of something that was not light and not energy and not anything that had a name lanced upward from Antarctica, through the atmosphere, and into the heart of the Dominion fleet. The effect was instant. Ships did not explode. They did not burn. They simply stopped existing. A corridor of pure emptiness was carved through the armada. Where there had been warships, there was now nothing. Not debris, not radiation, nothing. 3,000 ships vanished in the first shot. Hajun adjusted the targeting and fired again. Another corridor of nothingness, another 2,000 ships gone. He fired a third time, a fourth. Each shot carved a wound in the armada that could not be healed, because there was nothing left to heal. The Dominion fleet broke. Ships fled in every direction, no longer following orders, no longer a fleet at all, just thousands of individual vessels running for their lives. Supreme Warlord Draven screamed at his captains to hold formation, but no one was listening anymore. Lieutenant Minji Yoon, her own ship crippled and drifting, managed to get one last sensor reading and transmitted the coordinates of Draven's flagship to Hajun. Hajun received them. He entered them into the targeting system. He fired one final time. The beam struck the flagship directly. Supreme Warlord Draven, who had destroyed 3 species and burned 100 worlds, ceased to exist, without a sound, without a flash, without even a shadow left behind. The Battle of Earth was over. The wreckage of thousands of Dominion ships drifted in orbit. Humanity's fleet was shattered. The moon was scarred. Mars was silent. The list of the dead was enormous. Jian Han, Yuna Bay, thousands of sailors and soldiers and civilians whose names would take days to read. But Earth still turned. The oceans still moved. And 7 billion human beings were still free. Do-hyun Park stood on the broken bridge of the Gwangato and looked out through a cracked viewport at the blue world below. His uniform was torn. His face was covered in dust and blood. He was exhausted beyond words, but he was smiling. The galaxy did not sleep that night. News of what had happened at Earth spread faster than any fleet could travel. Communication relays carried the data from system to system, and within days, every species in the Dominion had heard the story. The Grand Pacification Armada, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, had been broken. 40,000 ships sent to crush a single planet, and the planet had won. The Supreme Warlord was dead, the World Enders were destroyed, and the species that the Dominion had classified as livestock was still alive, still standing, and very, very angry. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The Concord of Nine, already fractured by fear and blame, shattered completely. 3 of the 9 ruling species sent secret messages to Earth within hours, begging for peace. They had never wanted this war, they claimed. They had been outvoted, they said. They offered trade, information, star charts, anything to avoid becoming the next target. 2 other species pulled their fleets back to their home systems and began building defenses, no longer trusting the Dominion to protect them. The remaining 4 argued endlessly about what to do next, trapped between pride and terror. But it was not only the powerful who reacted. Across the Dominion, hundreds of species that had been classified as servile for centuries, or even millennia, heard the news and felt something that most of them had forgotten was possible. Hope. For the first time in living memory, a servile species had fought back and survived. The chains had not broken yet, but they had cracked, and everyone could hear the sound. On Earth, the celebration was brief. People wept and cheered and held each other in the streets, but the joy was mixed with grief so deep that it had no bottom. The cost of survival had been staggering. The fleet was in ruins. Mars was abandoned. The moon was scarred. Luna Station Prime was gone. Hundreds of thousands of people were dead, military and civilian alike. Every family on the planet had lost someone or knew someone who had. General Unbi Kwan did not celebrate at all. She stood in the rebuilt war room of Lunar Command and studied the galaxy map projected on the wall in front of her. The Dominion was wounded, but it was not dead. It still controlled thousands of star systems. It still had millions of ships scattered across its territory. If humanity waited, if they rested, if they allowed the Dominion to recover and regroup, then all of this, all the blood and sacrifice and fury, would mean nothing. They would come again, and again, and again. She addressed the United Nations General Assembly, which now included representatives from every human colony and outpost that had survived. She stood at the podium, in her uniform, small and straight-backed, her voice as calm and clear as it had always been. "They came to our home," she said. "They called us animals. They killed our people and burned our stations. If we stop now, they will recover. They will return. And next time, there may be no last-minute miracle. We must go to them, not with cruelty, not with the desire to conquer, but with the certainty that this will never happen again, to anyone." The vote was unanimous. Humanity began Project Exodus. Dr. Ha-Jun Lim and his team worked around the clock, reverse engineering captured Dominion technology and combining it with human engineering. Within 1 year, a new fleet was built. 2,000 warships, each one carrying a miniaturized version of the Hammer of Dawn. They were not pretty ships. They were welded together from human steel and alien salvage, ugly and functional, built for one purpose. Admiral Do-Hyun Park was given command. He had not wanted the promotion. He had wanted to rest. But when General Kwan asked him, he said yes, because he knew that the people who had died, Jian, Yuna, and all the others, had not died so that the survivors could sit still. Captain Min Ji-yoon served as his tactical officer. She was 28 now, older in her eyes than in her years. The same woman who had trembled at her console during the Battle of the Red Corridor. She did not tremble anymore. The fleet launched from Earth's rebuilt orbital shipyards. On the hull of every ship, a name was etched. The names of the dead, every single one of them. The ships carried the dead with them into the stars. The campaign was not a war of conquest. It was a dismantling. Humanity moved through Dominion space and destroyed every military installation they found. Shipyards were erased. Weapons factories were flattened. Fleet staging grounds were turned to dust. They did not occupy worlds. They simply removed the ability of the Dominion to ever again build the kind of force that had been sent to Earth. And wherever they went, the chains broke. Delegate Rovan of the Telleri had been waiting for this moment for his entire life. His species had been servile for 3,000 years, forced to work in the mines and factories of the Dominion, their culture suppressed, their history erased. When news of Earth's victory reached his world, he had wept. Now, as the human fleet advanced and the Dominion's grip loosened, Rovan stepped forward. He contacted Admiral Park and offered everything he had: intelligence on Dominion fleet positions, maps of military installations, names of other enslaved species who were ready to rise. Park accepted. The alliance grew. First the Telleri, then the Keishi, a species that had been servile for 800 years. Then the Malth, the Dunari, the Vressen. One by one, species that had been kept in chains for centuries joined the coalition. Not under human rule. Humanity made that clear from the beginning. This was not a new empire. This was a partnership of the free. The 4 remaining loyalist species of the Concord made their final stand at the capital system. They gathered every ship they had left, thousands of vessels, and formed a wall around their homeworlds. It was an impressive display. It lasted less than a day. Admiral Park's fleet cut through their defenses with cold precision. The miniaturized Hammer of Dawn weapons carved paths of emptiness through the Dominion formations. Capital ships vanished. Defense platforms ceased to exist. By evening, the capital system was open, and the last remnants of the Concord surrendered. The Galactic Dominion, which had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, was finished. In the weeks that followed, representatives from over 200 species gathered on a station built in neutral space. It was the largest assembly of intelligent life in galactic history. Humans stood among them, not above them. General Yunbi Quan, now the most recognized figure in known space, was asked to speak. She did not give a grand speech. She did not talk about victory, or power, or humanity's greatness. Instead, she read names, the names of every human who had died in the war, the names of every enslaved being who had perished under the Dominion's rule, as many as could be found and recorded, the names of every world that had been silenced. It took 3 days. When she finished, the station was silent. Hundreds of species, some of whom had never even met a human before, sat in that silence and understood. This small, stubborn species, from a small, stubborn world, had not fought for power. They had fought because someone had looked at them and said, "You are nothing." Quan set down the datapad and looked out at the gathered galaxy. "We were called slaves," she said. "We were called cattle. We were told we were nothing." She paused. The silence was complete. Remember what nothing did to you. The Terran Accord was signed that day. It was not a treaty of submission. It was a promise. A simple promise that every species, no matter how small, no matter how young, no matter how weak, had the right to exist free. No more classifications. No more chains. No more sovereigns and serviles and ferals. Just people. Free people. Admiral Doyen Park signed on behalf of humanity. Delegate Roven signed on behalf of the Telleri. 200 other delegates signed for their own people. When it was done, Park shook Roven's hand, and the Telleri delegate held on for a long time, because it was the first time in 3,000 years that anyone had treated his kind as equals. Minji Yun stood near the back of the room and watched. She was quiet. She was thinking about a young woman who had once sat at a weapons console with shaking hands, firing at a ship she did not think she could hit. She thought about how far that woman had come. She thought about everyone who had not come with her. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds that had never known freedom, beings looked up at the stars. They did not know much about the small blue planet that had changed everything. They did not know about the oceans, or the mountains, or the way the sunlight looked in the morning. But they knew its name. Everyone knew its name now. Earth, the world that refused to kneel, the world that burned an empire, the world that looked at the entire galaxy and said, in a voice that was calm and clear and absolutely certain, "No." And the galaxy, for the first time in 12,000 years, was free.